What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, December 14th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, and opinions. And, of course, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of our program today. So let's just get right on into it. We are seeing a report out of FortRuss.com that Ukraine has begun shelling near Mariupol. Now, Steve Lenman yesterday wrote an article basically saying that there was going to be some kind of a false flag, that there was going to be this metals work plant in Mariupol that was going to be blown up, releasing all kinds of ammonia, which would then be blamed on Donbass. But I guess they just decided, to heck with that. Nobody buys these false flags anymore. And they've just begun shelling, and apparently it's 120 millimeter, 82 millimeter mortar shells, AGS, RPGs, large caliber machine guns, and apparently 29 grenades were fired from automatic grenade launchers. And so it looks like it's really on Ukraine's invasion of the Donbass. And of course, the big question is going to be, what, if anything, will Russia do? And Putin's in a very difficult position, because I'm sure there's a part of him that would like to say, well, I don't want this to escalate, so I'm just going to hang back. But he's dealing with his own hardliners and the fact that at some point Russia has to stand up and say no more. Whether that's going to happen now or not, we don't know. Meanwhile, getting back on over to Paris, France, a lot of people are wondering if Ayn Rand's prophecy is coming true, and saying that these riots were completely predictable and could be a precursor to what can happen in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, or Seattle tomorrow unless things change. And we're seeing a government that's completely out of skew, trillions for climate change, trillions for war, nothing to repair our roads, nothing to take care of our homeless veterans, and everybody's feeling the squeeze. And they have a wonderful analogy in this article, which came out of News with Views, saying if you squeeze a tomato hard enough, it will ooze out between your fingers, and Paris is oozing right now. And that's exactly what's happening. Another article, this one out of the American Conservative, the Yellow Vests versus the European Empire. And they're out there casting around for an explanation of what's going on, because even though Macron caved in on that one gas tax, the Yellow Vests are making more demands. It's spreading. It's all over the place. And of course, they're trying to blame Putin. Oh, this is all Putin. It's Vladimir Putin, because the French people love their taxes, and they love the open borders, and they love the refugees. Well, no, they're not getting a lot of traction with that one. So now the new villain is Facebook, because the Yellow Vests are communicating almost entirely on small, decentralized Facebook pages. So that's the new villain. Mark Zuckerberg, he's behind this. He's behind the Yellow Vests, and it's rather ridiculous, because there have been revolutions before the days of social media, before the days of electricity, and they found ways to communicate. During the French Revolution back in the 1700s, they had printing presses. They printed up thousands and thousands of leaflets and pamphlets, and they would just get up on the rooftops and throw them into the street where people would pick them up. So it's ridiculous to blame Facebook for this. And Russian TV news has aired footage of the Yellow Vests being gassed by the police on the Champs-Élysées. And it gives you an idea of what these protesters are experiencing and what they're dealing with. And the French police are just out there, and they're using tear gas, they're using water cannons, they're using this new unknown chemical weapon, which apparently is some kind of a a tranquilizer or renders unconscious just on skin contact. So they're out there using that one here. Story coming out of Sputnik News saying that the yellow vests are the outcome of the European Union's decade-long austerity measures. And austerity is a fancy word for you must make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. And the French people are sick and tired of that. For that matter, so is the rest of Europe. So is the United States of America, the people here. We're tired of doing without while we see the elites live lives of royalty above us. Did you know Nancy Pelosi owns a vineyard out in California? She's the fourth richest Californian in Congress, and she's got her own vineyard. It's just amazing here. Anyway, there have been over 1,700 arrests so far. Now the French unions are taking to the streets calling for a day of action in Paris. And we're seeing a lot of cases where the French police don't want to interfere with the yellow vests. In fact, some of the police have been seen actually standing with them. We know that some of the other first responders are. This isn't the fault of Vladimir Putin, and it isn't the fault of Facebook. It's the fault of Emmanuel Macron and the European Union. The draconian controls the European Union has placed over the member states of the EU, not to mention the predations of that European Central Bank. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, when Macron came on out with his little TV presentation, he tried to quell the Yellow Vest protest by vowing to increase minimum wage and cut some taxes. But he was playing to the people who were in the streets in the cities, and he ignored a rather large segment of the French population, the farmers. And raising the minimum wage and cutting taxes means nothing to farmers who are working 70 hours a week and living on slim budgets. And this is coming from their union head. And that may explain that video the other day where some farmers brought in this manure spreading machine and they were flinging horse poo at the government buildings here. Meanwhile, Ben Swan is asking a very pointed question. The media continues to ignore the Yellow Vest protests. Why? Well, Ben, the answer is very simple. They don't want the American people to get bad ideas or double plus ungood ideas. If they see the Yellow Vests over in France actually getting the government to start capitulating to demands, why, who knows what might happen here in the United States of America? We could actually see democracy break out. And where would we all be then? So good for the French, and it looks like it's going to be another rowdy weekend over there in the City of Lights. Now, as you know, yesterday we finally had that hearing before the House Oversight Committee looking into the Clinton Foundation, and the Democrats put on a real show of trying to say, well, the Clintons are out of office. It's old news. It's history. And we should be looking at Trump. Let's look at the Trump Foundation and the Whitaker Foundation. That's what we should be looking at. But, of course, this hearing had been set up specifically for the Clinton Foundation. It was right there in the title. And the Democrats were grandstanding and trying to stall. But once these financial analysts got up and started testifying, the information came out was just devastating. And they even got into Uranium One and basically talking about all the money that poured into the Clinton Foundation during the Uranium One deal. And they pointed out the fact that the foundation saw its revenues drop by more than half after Hillary Clinton lost that election. So clearly it indicates that the donors to the foundation were expecting access and special favors. And we know that there are, in fact, emails that reflect where, you know, if somebody wants to see the Secretary of State, make sure they make a donation. That was just going on. Now, of course, the Clinton Foundation continues to deny all allegations of pay-to-play. What was really notable about yesterday's hearing is U.S. Attorney John Huber, U.S. Attorney for Utah. He was the prosecutor appointed by former Attorney General Jeff Sessions to investigate the Clinton Foundation. And because he was appointed by Sessions, we should have known from the beginning it was just going to be more of the same kind of cover-ups. He was supposed to be the main witness yesterday, and he did not show up. And Mark Meadows said the Justice Department would not allow Huber to appear. Now, the reason being given now is that the FBI has an open investigation into the Clinton Foundation. And it doesn't mean anything's going to be done. But that's a very common tactic of our corrupted federal government. When something is being looked at closely, they'll say, oh, we're doing an investigation. Everybody else has to basically stand down. That's what the Warren Commission was all about following the assassination of John F. Kennedy. They wanted to head off all the investigations in Texas, which is really where the jurisdiction for the crime lay. At that time in history, there was no federal law regarding the assassination of a president. So John F. Kennedy was murdered in Dallas, Texas, and Dallas, Texas had jurisdiction. And the White House literally snatched JFK's body and brought it back to Washington, D.C. Then they set up the Warren Commission specifically to head off all other investigations and collect all the data to themselves to keep it under control. And that's obviously what John Huber has been doing. Okay, so let's talk about the war zones. There is so much going on over there. Russian forces have started a siege, that's how it's being described, of the U.S. base at Tanf. And Russians have established several military positions near the U.S.-controlled zone of Tanf. This is coming from pro-government media activists. And apparently a source reported that several air defense systems and other military equipment were deployed at the Russian positions. And more weapons, including heavy rocket launchers, are reportedly expected to arrive there in the next few days. Now, the Saudi London-based newspaper Asharq al-Awsat even claimed that Russia is going to deploy an S-300 system to the province of Deir ez-Zor. Of course, this may be propaganda coming from Saudi Arabia, which is trying to fuel the tensions between the Syrian, Iranian, Russian alliance and the U.S.-Israel-led bloc. So everybody's out there. Truth is the first casualty of war. Now, here's something that's very alarming. Early this month, forces of the U.S.-led coalition employed its M142 high-mobility artillery rocket system to fire several rockets at positions of the Syrian Arab Army. That's the government's army in the area of Al-Ghurab Mount. Now, the shelling caused no casualties, but of course it's increasing the tensions in the area. Russia has now come on out, basically slamming the continued illegal U.S. occupation of southwest Syria. And basically saying, and this is the Al-Tanf area, and Russia is concerned because the U.S. is effectively protecting some 6,000 armed militants Russia has designated as terrorists. So the head of Russia's National Defense Control Center, Colonel General Mikhail Mizintsev, called the U.S. occupied areas the last stronghold of evil, which continues to fester with the militants on the territory of the independent state. Now, the Pentagon has a somewhat different opinion. The Pentagon is taking the position that all of the illegally occupied Syrian areas now constitute U.S. territory. And that's basically the position. We occupy it. It's now U.S. territory. U.S. law applies. Syrian law does not apply. And saying everything here is subject to our will under our rules. Now, northern and southern parts of Syria territory are illegally occupied by U.S. forces who clearly intend to stay indefinitely. But what we're seeing on display here is hubris and arrogance, along with contempt for democracy, contempt for other nations' sovereignty, and the rule of law, which is exactly how hegemons operate. Okay. Syria is condemning illegal excavations by the U.S., France, and Turkey in northern Syria. This is all taking place in the U.S.-controlled areas. And they're starting to call this the archaeology wars, because these excavations are being carried out on ancient sites in Manbij, Afrin, Idlib, Hasaka, and Raqqa. And the Syrian Foreign Ministry says it has information. The illegal excavation work has been increased in the areas where the aforementioned forces have a presence and a clout over the local militia groups. And they're saying that these actions represent yet another war crime committed against the Syrian people and the Syrian heritage, saying that the looting of artifacts is part of a scheme to destroy the cultural heritage and historic identity of Syria. Now, we know under the New World Order globalists, destroying cultural heritage and your history is part of their agenda. But there's another player in the area, and that is, of course, Israel. And the reason is simply because there's virtually zero archaeological evidence to support the story of ancient Israel as told in the Torah or the Old Testament. It's just not there. The few artifacts that have been presented all turned out to be fake, like the temple staff pomegranate ornament, the Jehoash tablet, the James ossuary box, and Israel has been trying to use archaeology to justify its possession of that land. Meanwhile, if you walk into any other country in the Middle East, you can't take 3 steps without tripping over some artifact of their ancient past. And Israel would like all of that to go away, to level the playing field. During one of the previous wars with Egypt, there was even a discussion of Israel nuking the pyramids and just erasing them. Now, up in Ukraine, a former Ukrainian envoy to NATO, Major General Petro Garashuk, is basically out there saying that Ukraine wants nuclear weapons. They have the ability to develop and produce their own nuclear weapons, and they can produce these intercontinental ballistic missiles. So Ukraine wants to become a nuclear power. Now, that puts the United States government in a very serious bind, because on the one hand, you have Iran, which isn't actually building nuclear weapons, but they are building missiles as a deterrent, and the U.S. is coming down hard on them. Same thing with Korea. Now, Ukraine wants to play the same game. How will the United States respond to this? Well, we all know we're going to have to worry about international sanctions for their nuclear arsenal. NATO has promised to provide secure communication equipment to Kiev before the end of the year. So they're really pouring in the equipment here. And what they're talking about, of course, is encrypted radios, frequency hopping radios, distributed antenna systems, so they can't be hunted down. And they're just pouring it on in there. Now, this next story is a little bit bizarre. The head of Ukraine's Orthodox Church publicly thanked the CIA's covert operations chief. I mean, you don't see this happening in public, but it did in Ukraine. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as you know, over the last few years, every time there's a Russian plane in international airspace that gets close to a Western country, the media just goes ballistic. Oh my goodness, they're being aggressive. They're flying their bombers in international airspace. Forgetting, of course, that other nations do exactly the same thing. In fact, even to a higher degree. Because apparently for this year, 2018, Russia's anti-air defense forces detected and escorted about 3,000 foreign fighter aircraft, of which more than 1,000 were reconnaissance aircraft, basically out of their airspace. So, again, we're getting only one side of the story from the corporate media here. Alrighty, now, up in Kosovo, their parliament has voted to create their own army. And Russia, of course, is rather opposed to that. And TASS reported basically today, those who are behind Kosovo's daring and illegal act do not even need to guess. The only ones who supported the Kosovars are the United States. And yes, that was definitely true. What's really interesting, though, is that Serbia is threatening to send armed forces into Kosovo if they start to create an army. So let's just add one more flashpoint to a world getting ready to blow itself up over basically a lot of silliness here. All right, Mike Pompeo is up at the United Nations, and he's still frothing at the mouth about Iran and their missile testing, and missile proliferation is growing. And he was addressing the UN Security Council about Iranian missile proliferation. And, of course, he criticized the Iran nuclear deal, justified why Trump pulled out of it, urged the United Nations to restore a ban on ballistic missile testing by Iran, challenging the Security Council to get serious about this real risk from proliferation from the Iranian regime. Okay, Mike, what do you think Iran is going to do? Surrender all their possible weapons of deterrence and just wait to be invaded? Because the United States has played this game before. They'll go into a country and get them to surrender their weapons of deterrence with promises of security, and then they'll invade. They did it to Iraq. They did it to Syria. They're trying to do it to Iran. They're trying to do it to Korea, North Korea. And what was really ironic was Mike Pompeo made this bizarre comment about all the nations of the Middle East who all they want is peace and prosperity. Well, the only reason there isn't peace and prosperity in the Middle East is because the United States keeps bombing countries and destroying their economies. I mean, if you look at before and after pictures of Baghdad, before Desert Storm and as it is today, or any of these other areas, you will see that the reason they are not prosperous is because of the U.S. interventions here. Meanwhile, a former CIA officer, Philip Giraldi, is saying that the United States will resort to the use of force if Iran tries to block the Strait of Hormuz. And that really wasn't very hard to figure out that's what's going to happen. That's why the United States has sent that aircraft carrier group over there. Iran really has to understand that if they do try and close that strait, it basically will be the red carpet for the war that the United States wants. So we need some cooler heads to prevail over there, I think. Alrighty, the PCHR weekly report on Israeli human rights violations in the occupied Palestinian territory for this past week. Israeli forces continue to use lethal force against the peaceful protests for the Great March of Return along the Gaza Strip borders. This is now the 35th week along the eastern and northern borders of the Gaza Strip. And the Israeli forces also continue to use armed force as well during the incursions into the West Bank. And over in the West Bank, the Israeli forces killed a Palestinian civilian in southern Hebron, wounded 29 others, including 4 children in separate shooting incidents. In the Gaza Strip, the Israeli forces wounded 93 civilians, including 23 children, 2 women, 2 journalists, and 2 paramedics. So, apparently on December 11th, Israeli forces killed a Palestinian civilian from Ethna village, west of Hebron, by opening fire at his vehicle. He was taken by ambulance to the hospital in Hebron, where he shortly thereafter died. It's the same context. Israeli forces during the reporting period. No, that's a repeat of the previous paragraph here. Basically, Israel is claiming that the Palestinian in the car was trying to run them down. Witnesses are saying, no, he posed no threat. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about events down in Israel and Palestine. And for some reason, yesterday, the Israeli occupation forces raided the headquarters of the Palestine Olympic Committee. in the West Bank city of Al-Birah. And apparently the Israeli soldiers raided the headquarters in an attempt to retrieve the tapes of the surveillance cameras. And this is kind of this weird story where all of a sudden Israeli forces are running around confiscating surveillance camera footage. And apparently the soldiers forced the committee's employees into a single room, physically assaulted some of them. But apparently the Olympic Committee refused to hand the tapes over. That may be why they got physically assaulted. But what is going on out there in the streets that Israel does not want a record made of? Now, as you know, the United States government takes a huge amount of money away from you, and they send it over to Israel as military aid. And because of public concern over Israel's past belligerence, there are supposedly rules in place that the money sent by the United States to Israel is for defense only. But as it turns out, apparently, according to inside sources, the State Department is refusing to verify this. They're refusing to verify that the money being sent is used only for defense, and the concern is that weapons paid for by the United States have been used in the killings of at least 272 Palestinians since 2009. Israel's getting ready to authorize thousands of settler homes built illegally in the occupied West Bank, some of them decades ago. Now, illegally, legal, there's a fuzzy line here we need to clarify. Under international law, they are all illegal. Under Israeli law, some are declared illegal. They're authorized by the Israeli government. In some cases, settlers have just gone on in, grabbed a bunch of land away from the Palestinians, and built their own settlements, which are considered illegal under Israeli law. But of course, nothing is ever being done about it. What Israel is getting ready to do is retroactively declare all these settlements as legal and permitted. And this is coming from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Remember the other day he was saying, as long as I'm prime minister, no settler will be uprooted. Well, this apparently is where he's walking the walk on that one. Yesterday, extremist settlers rampaged through the village of Ein Yobraud to the northwest of Ramallah in the West Bank and just started firing at homes. And apparently they were accompanied by the Israeli army from the nearby Ofra settlement, and they just raided the village and opened gunfire at Palestinians' homes. And the settlers remained in the village until the local citizens were able to basically drive them off and push them back. Meanwhile, settlers from Yitzhar settlement, south of Nablus, attacked a home in the village of Burin and burned it to the ground along with a car that was parked outside. So, now, getting on back to this raid of Al-Birah, Israeli occupation forces shot and killed this 60-year-old Palestinian business owner, Hamdan al-Arda. Now, al-Arda was driving in his car, and soldiers simply opened fire on the car, killing him. The Israeli army issued a statement that a terrorist attempted to use his car to run over IDF soldiers who were conducting operations. An IDF soldier was lightly wounded. Security forces at the scene responded with gunfire and neutralized the terrorist. That's the new polite word for killing somebody. But eyewitnesses, the man's relatives, and even Israeli sources are saying, no, this one does not pass the smell test. They just hauled off and killed this guy for the heck of killing this guy. Here in the United States, as you know, Israel's activists on college campuses are losing traction. They're out there pushing pro-Israel, anti-Palestine, and they're not getting a lot of traction on that. So it looks like they're going to re-up it. And they want to push to purge all U.S. college campuses of any critics. We can't convince them. Let's get rid of it. And what we're seeing, of course, is U.S. public recognition that Israel is suppressing the rights of Palestinians. It's a legitimate human rights concerns. And we're seeing students on college campuses across the country are calling on their universities to divest from companies that do business in Israel, specifically the West Bank, the illegal settlements. Newly elected members of the United States Congress are saying what was once unsayable, that maybe it's time for the United States to question its unqualified diplomatic and financial support for Israel. They may be our closest ally in the Middle East, but it should be held to the same human rights scrutiny applied to other nations around the globe. The New York Times actually published a column arguing that criticism of ethno-nationalism in Israel isn't necessarily anti-Semitic. So they're finally getting away from this idea that all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, which was nonsensical to begin with. That's like saying that the only reason people complain about the Nazis is they hate the German people. It's the behavior that's the issue. It's the actions that's the issue. It's not their ethnicity. It's not their religion. It's not their clothing. It's not their social custom. It is how they behave. How the government of Israel behaves is what is at issue. Now, as you know, New York University's students, they're determined to keep investing in firms that supply Israel with weapons. So I guess New York University's administration wants to teach those students that democracy is dead, that they can vote all they want, and nothing is going to happen. Might as well get used to it now, kiddies. You live in the United States of America here. But the reality is, according to this article in Foreign Policy, Americans are increasingly critical of Israel. New polling is showing the U.S. public views on Israel's policies are shifting away. And apparently one of the catalysts for that was the firing of Professor Mark Lamont Hill as a CNN contributor for simply going to a United Nations event commemorating the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people and saying the Palestinians deserve their human rights. And so Israel's supporters immediately called up CNN and said, "You will fire him." And CNN said, "Yes, massa, yes, massa, yes, massa." The more Israel is doing, the more oppressive they become, the more abusive they become of our First Amendment, the more Americans are saying, no, this is not what we are supposed to be in this country. We're supposed to be a nation with a Bill of Rights, including that First Amendment, which gives us the right to peacefully protest the actions of Israel's government, both in Israel and right here in the United States of America. Now, apparently, there's an author, Ronan Bergman, and he wrote a book, Rise and Kill First, The Secret History of Israel's Targeted Assassinations. And apparently it's a very well-researched book exposing the details of Israel's global killing program. Israel even changed and extended their secrecy laws to try and prevent Bergman from gaining access to historical documents. But despite this, he got access to some 1,000 different sources that basically talk about how Israel just travels the world killing people they don't like, including possibly Yasser Arafat himself. This is why we're critical of Israel, not because of their religion, not because of their ethnicity, because of their behavior. Running around the world murdering people. That's a bad thing. Take it from me. That is a bad thing. In fact, I think Moses came down off the mountain with a stone tablet that said right on top of it, "Thou shalt not kill." That's supposed to be sacred to the Jewish faith as well as the Christian faith, but not to the government of Israel here. Well, Israel is already getting ready to try and win over newly elected members of Congress, and they're setting them up for their free trip to Israel. And 6 newly elected House members are now on a 5-day visit to Israel, along with a delegation of Northern California progressive leaders. They're on a week-long trip. Tara Setmeyer from CNN just returned from such a trip, and a delegation of Southern California progressive leaders returned from their trip earlier this month. Now, I'm sure the trip is very impressive. They get to see Israel. They get to see the antiquities. They get propagandized a lot. Maybe they get set up with a honey trap and videotaped to make them reliable in the future. But apparently, some of the people who went were Tim Burchett, Republican of Tennessee; Dan Crenshaw, Republican of Texas; Susie Lee, Denver, Nevada; Elaine Goodman Lauria, Democrat, Virginia. I'm sorry, that was Democrat, Nevada. Denver, but it's all over the place. Denver Riggleman, who's a Republican from Virginia; and David Trone, Democrat from Maryland. The California participants are County Supervisors John Gioia and Joe Simeon, California Democratic Party Executive Committee member Andrea Beth Damsky, and unknown others whose names are being withheld. So Israel loves to do those trips. They do them for students, they do them for politicians, and apparently they come back from these trips just saying, oh Israel, how I will worship thee. Down in Yemen, there's good news, there's bad news. The good news is there's a ceasefire now in place in Hodeidah, and peace talks are continuing. The bad news is the humanitarian disaster is continuing. Part of this new ceasefire deal includes the opening of humanitarian corridors, so the United States are forced to choose which of their children will starve to death and which they will save. That's how bad it is. In other news, the Pentagon has corrected their so-called accounting error, which resulted in you paying for refueling Saudi and UAE jets that were bombing Yemen. And they've sent a bill, $331 million, which I'm sure Saudi Arabia and the UAE are well able to pay. Meanwhile, along with France and Belgium and Netherlands and Sweden and Canada, and there are now yellow vests in Great Britain, by the way. That started all over there. But apparently down in Thailand, there have been major protests. They're not wearing yellow vests, but they're protesting against the political machine of former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, who was accused of widespread corruption, abuse of power. The present Prime Minister, Yingluck Shinawatra, is Thaksin's sister and is seen as a puppet of her brother. So there really hasn't been a change. What the Thai people want is a complete change of the government. So earlier this week, the police were sent down there, ordered to harass and block the protesters. And to everybody's surprise, the police lowered their arms, took off their helmets, and joined with the protesters. It may be signaling a potential shift in power down there as well. Push for a global government, create a global revolution. It looks like it's really, really happening. Now, tensions are beginning to escalate between China and Canada, and China apparently wants to make Canada pay for being the U.S. lackey and arresting the Huawei CFO at the request of the United States. And now they're playing tit for tat with these other two Canadians who have been detained ostensibly for violating China's NGO law and for being a threat to China's security. So that's getting tense as well here. There's a very disturbing situation going on in South Africa, and we've been seeing this all over different parts of the continent there, where there's a growing anti-white bias. But the leader of a South African political party, Andile, and I can't pronounce this, Mngxitama, he's president of the Black First, Land First political party, which is behind a lot of these appropriating farmlands and redistributing them, was speaking at a rally, and he came on out and said, let's just kill the white people. We will kill their children. We will kill their women. For each one person that is being killed by the taxi industry, we will kill 5 white people. I don't know why taxis got into there, but he made the comment. For every one black person, we will kill 5 white people. And don't think it couldn't happen here, because there's this huge, huge anti-white sentiment that's being fanned up in the United States. Ann Coulter had an interesting comment about it, saying that apparently Jewish people who do not see themselves as white are fully on board with this anti-white hysteria now, which is weird because most of them are descended from the Khazars of Central Asia, and they actually do have very pale skin. When I was married to my first wife, I mean, I'd put my arm up against hers. I have much darker skin than she does. Now, National Security Advisor John Bolton is unveiling Donald Trump's Africa strategy on Thursday. We haven't messed up enough of the world. We're going to go into Africa. And Bolton came on out accusing Russia and China of interfering with the U.S. military in Africa. Because by golly, if there's anyone who's going to interfere in Africa, it will be the good old USA. That appears to be John Bolton's attitude. But he's accusing Russia and China of what he describes as predatory practices that interfere with the American military operations and pose a significant threat to America's homeland security interests. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about events down in Africa. And experts, okay, specifically Judge Devermont, the director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, saying China is using its economic clout in Africa to promote a new international order and encourage countries to adopt its communist ideology. See, they're waving the word communist at you. What's really going on is that China is making deals while the U.S. makes war. Same thing with Russia. They're putting through deals, energy deals, the Silk Road, harbors, all kinds of stuff. And it basically shows us that the world wants to do business. They don't want to do battle anymore. But they're out there trying to demonize Russia and China because they're getting in the way of our conquering the world. Down in the Congo, they've had a fire in the capital just 10 days before the presidential election, which destroyed 7,000 voting machines. Now, this was Congo's first use of voting machines. It's a rarity in Africa, and it caused concerns among the opposition about possible manipulation in favor of President Joseph Kabila's preferred successor. Now, Kabila is stepping aside, but apparently the fire broke out at a warehouse in Kinshasa, and they're saying the fire was criminal in nature. So apparently somebody was concerned that those 7,000 voting machines were rigged, and now they're going to have the election back on paper ballots here. Down in Venezuela, I think Maduro is starting to show signs of the stress he's under. Apparently, he's instructed the armed forces to maintain the highest level of combat readiness to defeat imperialist conspiracies. Now, that's not entirely unreasonable because it was only a month ago that you had officials within the U.S. government saying, the economic war isn't really working on out. It's time for a direct military intervention to save those poor Venezuelan people from the evil, cruel dictator that has destroyed their lives, forgetting that Venezuela is in the mess that it's in because of decades of economic war by the United States. So Maduro is saying that he thinks there may be an assassination attempt made against him. And don't forget, there was that failed attempt with that drone a while back. So this is how the U.S. operates. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan people, things have gotten so bad. They're now saying that they regret going along with the gun ban because they're feeling right now that the Venezuelan government is declaring war on what is essentially a disarmed population. Yeah, that's what tyrants do. They disarm the population, they remove the arms, and then they go on in, whether it's to a civil population or an entire country. Surrender your weapons, we promise everything's going to be okay. And then, of course, it's not okay at all. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're going to go ahead and take some phone calls, starting with Mateus in Canada. Mateus, sorry to keep you waiting so long. We had a little technical glitch where I wasn't getting my text messages.
Oh, that's okay. I thought I was being punished for complaining about callers.
No. It was a purely technical issue. Don't take it personal.
I know. You're a nice guy. You'd never do that. I'm just joking. Okay, so I live in Canada, and I was searching for Yellow Vest protests in Canada, and I couldn't find anything. And then I switched my IP address over to Japan, and I found all sorts of information about Vancouver, Canada, and other places in Canada protests. So clearly, both with the Google search and with the YouTube search, there's censorship going on, that you have to look outside of your country, outside of your own country, to get news about the inside of your country.
Yes, that's really the way it's become.
That's one thing. Yeah. And a few days ago, you were talking about how there was that yelling match with Trump and some other people, and someone was calling him Pinocchio. Remember that?
Yeah, that was Pelosi and Schumer.
Okay. So I just want to share with you my amazing insight on that, is that they were calling him Pinocchio not because of the lying nose, but because he's a string puppet.
I think both could apply.
Yeah, both could apply. And, you just have to look at the people, what the common denominator is of the people around him that are pulling the strings. And, like you said before, if you want to find out who you're controlled by, who is it that you can't name? So I'm not going to name any names. Oh, sorry, I got to sneeze. Achoo! Excuse me. And finally, if you like, okay, well, can I have permission to tell you I made a Christmas joke for you?
Real quick, yes.
Okay, what kind of wood does Santa Claus use to make his lumps of coal?
I have no idea.
Knotty pine.
Okay, that makes good. I like that one. I like that one a lot.
Hey, can I do one last real comment?
Yes.
Okay, Biden, which is kind of known to be a suspected sexual deviant.
Yes.
He seems to be lacking some sort of control over his thoughts, where he says what he's thinking, and it gets really awkward for him. And so there's this famous little YouTube video where there's Biden and Sessions, and there's a little girl, like about 3 years old, and then Biden's looking at this girl, then he bends over to go and do something like touch her or whisper something into her ear or something creepy, and then Sessions slaps Biden's hand back.
Yes.
So I just want everyone to really ponder this for a second, of what, like, really interpret what that means. Okay, now think of it this way. If you're Sessions and you don't know that this other guy is a pedophile, maybe, you would never assault an ex-vice president by slapping his hand. There'd be no reason to. But if you know that this guy's a sexual deviant, and you know the reason that Biden's hand is going out is because he just can't help himself but to go and start molesting a little girl, that's why you would slap the hand back. So Sessions knows. Now if Sessions knows, why isn't he saying anything? Well, this is how they're controlling Sessions. And it goes back to this whole thing where you can't rise up to that level unless you're controllable. And in the past, it was enough to cheat on your wife. Nowadays, you have to basically have murdered somebody or be a pedophile or something similar to that. So everyone just look at that video again. When Biden's hand comes towards the girl, Sessions slaps it back, and everybody ignores that. They both knew exactly that that's cool. Anyways, that was a little bit less funny than my comment before. So
yeah, I prefer the Naughty Pine situation here. Part of the problem is we are dealing with people who are sociopathic. That's why they seek power. And when they get that power and influence, they sort of give free rein to their impulses. Their impulse control is very poor, except if there's a TV camera in front of them, then they're on their best behavior. Anyway, Mateus, we're going to let you go and switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, Schumer gave Trump 10 Pinocchios because of the Washington Post article. And then Trump goes, oh, Washington Post. And he's like a smirk. Because, Jeff Bezos owns Washington Post, right? And
Yep.
well, we all know what the Washington Post is, and New York Times. But Mike, I think Putin's going to have to do something. There's a 90% chance when it comes down to it that he's going to, because that east part is Russian, and it's just, he's not going to abandon them. That's why that train load of, the mobile artillery, the 203 millimeters, were headed somewhere. Those have a maximum of 50-mile range.
I imagine that, Putin is obviously going to fortify the border between Russia and Ukraine, so that whatever happens over there in Ukraine doesn't spill over the border into Russia. I mean, once they get going, they might want to keep on going. So he has to fortify that border.
Yeah, because I guess, like you said, he's going to be under a lot of pressure too. And like I said, the chess pieces are getting fewer and fewer on that board. And Mike, this also, when you got France on fire, right? You had the yellow vest, and you got Britain with Theresa May with the Brexit, and you got, what's going on here. And to pull a Ukraine thing now and look at what Russia's doing, Russian aggression, that'll be the headlines.
Yes.
You know that, right? That's how it works. But, I just don't, Ukraine's a real man. If he does decide to go in, he's going to have to just keep within that eastern part, or maybe like Mark says, the Nip River, but not further than that. But I know they're moving tanks to Ukraine. I don't know if you heard that. They're moving like a amount. I don't know how many, but there's an amount of tanks moving too, not just artillery now.
Yeah, I heard that.
So yeah, but Mike, one last thing was it Pompeo or Bolton? That was debt colonization, they said. I'm like, wait a minute. France, Britain, the United States is all about debt colonization. So you know why? Because China is ready in Africa, like you said. They already built railroads, airports, brand new highways.
Yes. And
the United States is not building anything over there but the military bases to hunker down. That's it. They're not building up no infrastructure. So if you build up people's infrastructure, they tend to go with the people that build up your infrastructure, which is the Chinese.
Yes.
So that's how I look at that. All right, Mike, that's all I have to say. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And we'll clear our little phone log there. All right, now, over at the White House, as you know, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly is stepping down end of the month, and Donald Trump is trying to find a replacement. And he's gone through a couple of choices. Mark Meadows was considered, rejected. Apparently, some of the other people Trump really wanted to come on in have declined. And so now Trump is making what I think is a horrendous mistake that apparently, according to this article coming out of Huffington Post, Trump is considering his own son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to be the White House chief of staff. And you just know that the liberal corporate media is going to be screaming nepotism, 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 nepotism. And apparently Kushner has actually been actively campaigning to be chief of staff, citing his work on the criminal justice reform package. And he's claiming he's got an ability to work with Democrats. But apparently the Huffington Post called out over to the White House, and the White House did not respond. I think it would be a bad move. I think it would be a very, very bad move here. All righty. We're looking at all these little investigations that are going on around here. And Michael Cohen is out there saying that Donald Trump made him do it. We're not sure what it is. And whether or not it was even illegal. Hush money, to these women that Trump had affairs with. Because as I understand it, it was handled the way a publisher would. We wish to buy the exclusive rights to your story. Here's the check. You sign this contract saying you will never talk about this again. And then you put the rights up on a shelf and you never publish. And that has happened quite a few times to keep certain stories out of the media. It's not actually illegal. But looking back at Cohen, his past is not all that lily white. And apparently, when he became, years before he met Trump, he was a personal injury lawyer, okay, otherwise known as an ambulance chaser. And he represented people in Brooklyn who filed very dubious personal injury claims resulting from suspected car accidents. And this was a hustle that was so common in the Brighton Beach section that detectives took to calling a specific apartment building where this all seemed to happen No Fault Towers, a reference to the British comedy Fawlty Towers. Cohen's law practice had also included cashing a $350,000 check made out to him by a Russian hockey player and extortion victim and intended for the girlfriend of an alleged Russian mobster. And apparently this all became the subject of a lawsuit. Now, Robert Mueller has announced, because he doesn't want to go on out and try and find a new job in the current job climate, starting next year, he's going to expand the election meddling probe to other nations, primarily in the Mideast, which I think is telegraphing the fact that he never did find anything about Russian meddling, which was that whole big deal. But now he wants to go on out and see if Saudi Arabia was seeking to meddle in the elections and Qatar was meddling. And according to the Daily Beast, Mueller's prosecutors will expose Middle Eastern nations' attempts to sway the U.S. politics in early 2019. Now, the reality is all nations try and influence other nations. The United States does it all the time. Election rigging has been a big part of the CIA's toolkit, going back at least to the end of World War II here. Little comment about Robert Mueller, though. And this is one of those things that is documented, but nobody wants to talk about it. And the story came out of basically that Robert Mueller's special counsel's office, after they reviewed Peter Strzok's text messages from his tenure at the FBI, they were erased. According to a new Inspector General's report, the Mueller team is specifically responsible for scrubbing of Peter Strzok's phone. That's obstruction of justice right there. Now, Christopher Steele, who wrote that Democrat-financed anti-Trump dossier, which turned out to be a complete work of fiction, has said in a court case that he was hired by a Democratic law firm in preparation for Hillary Clinton challenging the results of the 2016 presidential election. That was what lay behind all this stuff about Russian meddling and Russian interference and Russian this and Russian that. Hillary Clinton actually apparently was seriously considering challenging the election. And I'm sure a lot of people impressed on her that that could lead to a constitutional crisis, if not rioting in the streets here. But Christopher Steele said the law firm Perkins Coie wanted to be in a position to contest the results based on the evidence he unearthed on the Trump campaign conspiring with Moscow on election interference. And of course, nothing was really there here. If they'd actually moved forward to contest, somewhere along the way, somebody would have said, "Where's your actual evidence?" And that would have been difficult. All right, federal investigators are also probing U.S. President Donald Trump's inaugural committee to find out if money donated to it or spent by it was used for corrupt purposes. This is coming out of the Wall Street Journal. They reported it yesterday. The Committee for Funding the Celebration Expenses associated with Trump's inauguration to the presidency in January of 2017 raised a record amount of money, $107 million, more than twice what Barack Obama raised in 2008, which was itself also a record. And that money raised from donations was spent paying for reservations, caterers, entertainment, host of other expenses. So they're digging into that. What's really interesting is over at the White House, they're saying they're not aware that there's any investigation going on here. The Wall Street Journal said that prosecutors have sought documents related to one person's donation, but they haven't asked the inaugural committee for records, nor has the committee been contacted by prosecutors. So the Wall Street Journal, this may be fake news. Now, another story is out here, and this one's a little bit more serious. Federal prosecutors are reportedly looking into whether some of the top donors to Trump's 2017 inauguration gave money in exchange for access to administration. Again, as the coughing lady was saying at yesterday's House Oversight Committee hearing, donors to her campaigns expect that if she wins, they will have access. That's just normal. What makes this very complex is the claim is that there are Middle Eastern countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates which filtered donations to Trump using straw donors, basically a rerun of the Chinagate scandal from 1996. And if in fact this turns out to be true, that is a very, very serious situation. Because Donald Trump can take all the donations he wants from people here in the United States of America, but if it turns out it originated somewhere else, that's a violation of laws. Now, earlier in the week, I was just scratching my head and saying, why are they still after Donald Trump as hard as they can? He's given them almost everything they wanted. And Larry Klayman basically came on out with what I think is a good explanation. The Democrats want to impeach Donald Trump just so that they can say he was impeached going into the 2020 presidential election. I'm sure they don't want to run against him in 2020, but there are a lot of other Republicans who make credible candidates at this point. But the Democrats, they just want to be able to say, Donald Trump was that GOP president, he was impeached. You need to vote Democrat here. Now, over at Judicial Watch, Hillary Clinton has now filed her new answers under oath about the email system. And to nobody's surprise, she basically reiterated her earlier statements that the use of her private email server was purely for convenience. And one of the other questions was to detail how it was all set up. And she basically came up and said, well, I don't know. And she's saying that she was aware that the president had set up an email system, and she didn't know who set that up or what equipment it used or how it was created. Now, she's trying to blur the line between the government email server and the one that she had in her home. It was originally in her home, and then it was moved to a server farm. So she's still dodging, and of course, nobody expected her to tell the truth and say, oh, yes, you got me. So, U.S. District Court Judge Royce Lamberth has called the Clinton email issue one of the gravest modern offenses to government transparency. It is that. And he is ordering additional discovery. But if I am right, and there was espionage going on, that is a scandal of a magnitude that could bring down the entire government. And we're going to see the entire government just stonewall it like they're stonewalling on the Clinton Foundation. But Tom Fitton is basically saying that Hillary Clinton's assertion that she used a separate email system as a matter of convenience is simply not credible. Remember when she said she only wanted to carry one device around and then somebody photographed her with three? Her government-issued BlackBerry, her iPhone, and her iPad. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And I guess Jared Kushner is out. The White House has just announced Mike Mulvaney will be the next White House Chief of Staff. And maybe those early reports of Kushner being under consideration came from Kushner himself trying to sort of force the issue, which has been known to happen in the past. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Well, one of the things you just answered my question. I was going to say he gets Kushner, that'd probably be one of the worst. That might be the end of his presidency. I mean, I think that would finish him as far as being able to, but that's good. At least I think Mulvaney is a lot better, certainly, than Kushner. Kushner could be would actually make a better chief of staff for Benjamin Netanyahu, you know?
Yeah, I think he already is.
The House can. But yeah, but anyway, I just got a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. One is about, first of all, I don't know if you know, as far as Russia and the we were talking about the DPR, the Knesset People's Republic. They try to twice the DPR has defeated the Ukrainian army and probably could have gone into Kiev had Putin not put a restraining arm on them. I think the same thing would happen again. The question is, would the U.S. get involved? I don't think we would. I don't think we're that crazy yet. I don't think the people there are that nuts. But you never know. The other thing is about China. I just want to ask you. I'm hearing all this stuff, and a lot of the stuff is I'm hearing from InfoWars about China, and not only InfoWars. I'm hearing from other sources too that China is got like 1 million Uyghurs, whatever they call them, the Chinese Muslims in not concentration camps, re-education camps. The other thing is about that they're taking this Buddhist sect and taking their organs from them and selling them to the very healthy people.
Right now, hang on. Right now, given the very obvious and heavy-handed demonization of both Russia and China, I wouldn't give much credence to either of those unless there was some kind of hard factual evidence or corroboration. But we're seeing the media just come on out and say, "Oh, China's harvesting organs," and it's. I understand that the laws in China allow organs to be harvested under certain conditions, but the same is true here in the United States of America.
Okay, but you don't think they're forcibly taking people's organs? In other words, you think that's
that sounds to me like gratuitous China bashing. I mean, I looking at the birth-death numbers in China, I think there's going to be more than an adequate supply of raw material, as it were. This sounds to me like more, how horrible China. We've got to hate China, and we have to be very, very careful about that.
Well, that's why I asked you, because you know a little bit more, I think, about that than I do. I'm not that much up on. I am on Russia. I've done a lot of research and stuff in Russia, but I'm not so sure about China because they do call themselves still a communist state, and they also they've got Google and others and Apple helping them spy on evidently spying very badly on their own people, setting up that thing where if they don't have a certain social credit score, they can't use a train, they can't use a
that social credit score thing doesn't sound very good. But I want to get on back to this thing where they're flinging the label communist now. Here's the problem. I mean, communism is just another name for socialism. And look how many of the member states of the European Union are socialist. And we have people in this country screaming for socialism. So why is it okay for us and proof that China is evil?
But communism is an extreme form of socialism. It's actually, it's a dictatorship form of socialism. And that's another question I got about Venezuela. Do you think, how do you think it's the U.S.'s fault in Venezuela that they're doing so badly? I mean, you don't think it's just their socialist system that they brought in that they've messed up, or do you think the U.S. is meddling somehow?
Oh, the U.S. has been meddling in there for decades. I mean, don't forget they were behind the coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez. They've been committing economic warfare against Venezuela, primarily because Venezuela wants to sell their oil to the rest of the world for currencies other than the U.S. dollar. And the United States is meddling. I mean, look at the United States as a whole right now. Look at how many countries it's meddling in right now. Iraq, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Yemen, and on, and plus a whole bunch we don't know. If Bernie Sanders is correct, the United States is meddling right now in 170 different countries around the world.
Yeah, but how did it cause Venezuela being an oil-rich state, and I think they've got quite a few other resources. How did it cause the kind of, they're pretty much like Zimbabwe as far as their inflation goes and stuff like that, and shortages, barely able to feed themselves and all.
Well, real short, because we're at a commercial break here, is the U.S. banks will loan money to a country, and then the CIA will go in and sabotage the means by which those countries could repay the loans, driving them into unpayable debt. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we've got a caller waiting on the line, Jim in upstate New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate being on your show there. I love your content, by the way. But my comment is more with the Yellow Vest movement. And what it is, I have friends in Paris that are talking about it. There is, certain factions like young kids, going around breaking windows and stuff like that. But the bigger point here is that it's organic. It's not like an artificial construct. Like I have friends in Egypt also, that went through the Green Revolution. That was all contrived.
Yes.
And so the sentiments I'm getting, from the people I know over there, as well as I have friends in Belgium and Netherlands, which is spreading up. It's spreading to Belgium, Netherlands, and I think there's hints of it in Germany as well.
Yes.
And also, what's happening in Italy. So, I think there's a big distinguishing factor here. It's organic. It's not some kind of like George Soros, that is obviously not being covered in the United States.
No, it isn't. Might give the slaves uppity ideas.
Yeah, here you go. So I just want to thank you for covering the story, and I know you let off this evening with it. And it's a hot story that may have implications, and you've got your finger on the pulse, if you ask me. Because like I said, I have a lot of friends in Europe, and I got friends in Germany. Yeah, what it is, I'm an Army brat, so I've traveled a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I know Europe very well. And thank God I spent some time in the Middle East as well. In Egypt exclusively, and so thank you very much for covering it. And I ought to, compliment you for doing it. And, to tell people out there, this is organic. It's real.
I think it is. I think it is. And the fact that it's spreading so rapidly, and of course, George Soros would have no reason to bring down the Macron government because Macron is firmly on board with Soros' agenda. So, yeah, I do think this is the beginning of a global pushback against the global government.
Correct. And I think one of the major faux pas that he made was when Trump was over there. When he said that nationalism was a pariah, it's no good. That Macron made a major mistake politically, and it could be the impetus or the genesis of a major movement in Europe. And I'm excited about it. I have to be honest with you.
Well, I wish them a lot of luck, and apparently there's going to be more massive protests in France tomorrow, and who knows where all else. And I wish them a lot of luck, and I hope that nobody gets really hurt. But I think, to be very honest, the people who are committing the acts of violence, those are the paid agent provocateurs, in order to allow the media to portray the entire Yellow Vest protest as, a bunch of thugs. They pulled the same dirty trick with the Occupy Wall Street protests. The people who were down there protesting the financial oppression of Wall Street were doing so peacefully. And then all of a sudden a bunch of new people showed up, kicking over trash cans and setting fires and causing mayhem. Those are the paid agent provocateurs.
Correct. And what's interesting also is that the head of the union of the police department came out in support of the Yellow Vest. That's sort of like comparable of the Occupy movement in New York City, where the New York cops came out and supported them. You know what
Yes.
I mean? That's a major support. People don't understand that. You know what I mean? A police department doesn't come out like that. You know what I mean? Overtly. And so that's where, excited me. I'm like, wow, police, it's a union. Yeah, let's grant that. But were they supporting the people? That's something to think about. And scratch, it's one of those scratch your head moments. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And getting on back to the news here, Judicial Watch is launching an investigation into the ballot harvesting that took place in California. Now, ballot harvesting is where voters will fill out a ballot and allow a third party to take it and deliver it to the polling station or wherever ballots are being collected. In a lot of states, this is illegal because of the potential for fraud. And in California, it used to be illegal, but it was recently legalized. And of course, the concern there is it's wide open for fraud because you can take somebody's ballot and you can alter it, change it, replace it, and basically stuff the ballot box that way. So Judicial Watch is going to go back and look at what was going on in some of these California districts where they were winning. The GOP was winning on election night, and then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, they're saying, oh, we finished counting all of these other ballots that came in through ballot harvesting, and surprise, surprise, the Democrats have won. So, again, we need to have a solid, trustworthy, verifiable, totally transparent election system. And again, I refer you all to this article, How to Have Honest Elections. It's on the main page of my whatreallyhappened.com in the upper left, right underneath my hideously outdated picture. So, all right, the judge in the Michael Flynn case is holding off on his sentencing. He wants a review of key FBI notes. And this is coming out of the revelation that when Michael Flynn talked to the FBI, he was not informed it was actually a formal interview. He was not reminded that it is a crime to lie to the FBI. Apparently, he thought these FBI agents were allies. And what's really interesting is that the FD 302 that was prepared by Peter Strzok was prepared nearly 6 months after Flynn was interviewed. And apparently there was more than one. Now, Comey is saying, yeah, we kind of broke protocol during the Michael Flynn interview, but I didn't mean to do wrong. And he admits that he sent these two agents to interview Michael Flynn at the White House. And apparently Flynn had no idea it was actually an official part of an investigation. And Comey's now out there saying, well, maybe it's something I shouldn't have done. But so he's trying to distance himself from this. Now, this is really interesting. John Solomon is out there saying that the Defense Intelligence Agency holds a document with exculpatory information on it that could exonerate General Flynn, and they are refusing to release it. And Solomon is saying he doesn't believe the president even knows about this document. One lawmaker discovered it, but says he was thwarted by the DIA. So, anyway. Over at the Washington Post, they've gone on the warpath against Sputnik Radio. And quoting a group of so-called Russian experts who are from the intelligence and national security community, are accusing Sputnik Radio's loud and clear program of being part of a Russian conspiracy to sow distrust of the American criminal justice system. Well, how are they doing that? Well, they're reporting on injustices inside the United States. Those sneaky Russians, they're telling the truth. How can we compete with that? That's really what's going on here. The foreign media, including Russia Today and Sputnik and everything else, they're telling the truth about what's going on in this country. And they're drowning out the lies. And so now the latest propaganda is, how dare they? How dare they use the truth against us? All right, so let's talk about the economic news here. Speaking of Russia, Russia and Syria have agreed to dump the dollar in mutual trade, and they are going to create some joint energy projects in Syria. Again, the U.S. wants to make war. Russia wants to make deals. Now, as you know, the stock market did not have its traditional Friday happy ending, despite all the massaging it could get from the plunge protection team. And the Dow ended up just shy of 500 down. That's a big hit. At one point in the day, it was below 500. But basically, collapsing dollar liquidity is sending this dire signal for stocks. The Federal Reserve is trying to pull back on some of this QE. They want to do quantitative tightening to get some of this surplus cash out of the circulation, because it's creating inflationary pressures. But they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. The more they pull back on the money supply, the worse the stock market's going to do. The more money they allow out there at low cost to prop up the stock market, the more inflationary pressure there's going to be. So it's a balancing act. Now, the good news is that because the situation is worsening for the dollar, gold is looking very bullish for 2019. So hang on to those little gold coins, and remember, don't eat that chocolate bit out of the middle. They lose their value. Now, over at JP Morgan, speaking of gold, apparently they're looking at a potential class action lawsuit. Apparently one of their former metals trader pled guilty to manipulating precious metals over years. And there are already 6 lawsuits making similar allegations against JP Morgan that have been filed in New York federal court. And apparently the commodities group at the law firm is led by Vincent Briganti, the attorney who filed the first lawsuit on behalf of Dominic Cognata, a New York resident who alleges he suffered losses due to JP Morgan's trading conduct in the silver and gold futures and options markets. So once again, Jesse James was proven right. The real outlaws are the bankers. And JP Morgan's executives, they know they're immune from prosecution. You know, they might have to take a small hit on their end of the year bonus, but they'll pass any fines that they are required to pay. They'll just pass on to their customers and take off their taxes. Verizon is cutting 10,000 jobs in what's called a voluntary separation program. Verizon is admitting its Yahoo and America Online divisions are a failure. So they're cutting these 10,000 employees loose. Story out of Zero Hedge, the inequality gap on a planet growing more extreme. And it's everywhere. Every single country, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. It is reaching a point of severe instability, as we are seeing right now in France, as we have seen in Greece, as we are seeing in Thailand. All that wealth at the top makes society top-heavy, and it will flip around. That's why they call it a revolution. Apparently, there's problems over in the leveraged loan market. Banks are apparently unable to offload loans amid the record outflows. Now, banks like to make loans, and then they'll offload them, sell them off for an immediate cash return so that they can go on out and do that again. Apparently, that is becoming very difficult. Loan prices have fallen precipitously as loan funds suffered dramatic redemptions in recent days. Most notably, the Blackstone Leveraged Loan ETF, which last week saw its largest ever one-day outflow since its inception. The indicators are already all there. And by the way, people are waking up to what's going on Wall Street. The U.S. consumer optimism has plunged 8 points. That's the largest quarterly drop in 12 years. and does presage that it is going to be a terrible holiday shopping season for all those retailers. Over in New York, Amazon, which is a very large company, it's valued at $1 trillion. In fact, it's the world's richest company, is basically asking the New York City Council for $3 billion in tax breaks in order to build a new headquarters on the Long Island City neighborhood of Queens. And I didn't think Queens was on Long Island. I think this author made a mistake. But the people of New York are saying the subway system is crumbling, record homelessness, public housing in crisis, overcrowded schools, sick people without health insurance, escalating affordable crisis. Why is the world's richest company getting $3 billion in tax cuts, which basically means $3 billion not available to take care of the people of New York? And it's a legitimate question. And I'm sure that what's going to come on back is, well, we're going to give them these $3 billion in tax cuts, and they'll hire people. They will create jobs. No, Amazon is going to robots. Somebody got paid off somewhere, I think, here. Over in Asia, they're talking about how all of these new Silk Roads are merging into what's being called the Greater Eurasia. And Putin himself is unconditionally engaged to make it a success. And he's talking about the Eurasian Partnership. And it looks like it's going to be set as policy. And of course, that is a threat not only to the United States, but to Europe. Because, again, China is a manufacturing powerhouse. And with this One Belt, One Road project, they're going to be able to get their products into the European markets for much less cost than sending them by cargo ship. And obviously, the operators of those cargo ships and the countries in which those ships are flagged, they're very, very nervous about that. Little bit of news coming from the European Central Bank. Mario Draghi is going to be stepping down on October 21st of next year. And a search for a successor is already underway. So we're going to take a break for commercials here, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're just getting word here. Apparently, over the weekend, there will be a Flemish yellow vest demonstration. Apparently, it's going to be on Sunday. This is in Marrakesh. The mayor forbade the march. The groups went to court. The court said, yes, you have the right to march. Now, over in France, a group of top French military generals are accusing Emmanuel Macron of treason over that United Nations Migration Pact. And so now, along with the French people, many of the French police, all of the French unions, Macron may now have a military that is not ready to go along with his agenda any longer. All right, we're going to take a quick phone call. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike. I don't know, man. I'm thinking about that mysterious letter in George Bush's senior's funeral. I have a feeling, he wrote a confession that he admitted to assassinate JFK, and everybody's shocked.
This letter thing is being just blown way out of proportion. There's no information available. There's just nothing but a huge amount of speculation, and I think it's a distraction.
But everybody looks scared. You see the videos. Everybody looks shocked.
I looked at the videos, and I didn't see anybody looking particularly shocked. One of the things I hated about the videos is they're all slowed down, so you don't really get a read on what their facial recognition is. I think this is a distraction. So thank you very much for the phone call, Tony. We're going to let you go.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Get in some news here before the top of the hour, and the lovely lady Claire. Martina Markota is a documentary filmmaker, and she's out there saying that the migrants are turning France into a third world country, and she basically went around and making a video in Paris, the Paris neighborhoods, just showing how it's being turned into a dump and how the police are pretty much looking the other way. Now, getting on to the Brexit, that's still up in the air. Apparently, Theresa May was meeting with EU leaders, and the EU leaders are getting exasperated, saying, well, just what does Great Britain want? And they were going on, and apparently Merkel just kept interrupting May. So that's getting very hostile and stressful there. Over in London, there was a Brexit betrayal march. The British media reported it at about 1,500 people, but if you look at the video, it's tens of thousands of people were marching through the streets. The people have spoken. They want out of the EU. And by the way, pro-Brexit protesters in yellow vests blocked off the Westminster Bridge. So that yellow vest thing really is spreading globally here. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. When we come on back here, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to join us on hour number 3 of our show every Friday. And so, Claire, what's the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, you've been talking about it as sort of a leitmotif through the 2 hours, and that's the demonization of Russia and the demonization of China.
Yes.
Yes. And so this article comes to us, I believe, from Reuters, and it talks about the U.S. financial markets going into convulsions, a disheartening economic data out of China, looming government shutdown, renewed fears about a no-deal Brexit, and Dow component J&J's worst day in 16 years. Now, there is another thing that strategists can add to their list, citing a top-secret intelligence report. I'm sorry, this is NBC News, said today that the U.S. suspects that North Korea is still evading U.S. by secretly transferring oil at sea, and that Russia and China are helping it. Now, I'd like some facts, please. I would like some serial numbers on those ships, where they were, because right now, with the lamestream media, if they don't give me facts, I can't believe anything they say.
Nope.
And what I'm hearing in this rant is to try to get people to hate China and hate Russia when, Mike, there's no proof. There's nothing they've got. You know, just more demonization. Okay. And we got this from Global Research. Again, this is a resource I encourage you to use. You won't agree with every article, but they are very much more fact-centric than a lot of blogs out there. And we're seeing this happen. There's sort of a life cycle to nationhood.
Yes.
The beginning, the ascent, and then the descent.
The decay and the collapse.
Yeah.
I think we're at the collapse in this country.
Yeah, I think so too. And apparently, China is moving forward with its global infrastructure program, and the trade war tariffs have had little impact on isolating Beijing from its principal markets. Also, U.S. policy has increased China's role as a leading advocate of open trade against President Trump's protectionism. And trying to encircle and sanctioning Russia has only pushed Russia closer to Beijing. And the U.S. has increased its normal proxies of Latin America and Africa, but they all depend on trade and investment from China. This is particularly true of agro-mineral exports to China. Now, folks, this is the very scenario Mike and I have seen unfolding for years now. It's sort of like that archetypal dream when you can see two trains that are about to collide and you can't get word to anyone in time for this to stop. And what they're trying to do is pull the world back to a unipolar financial model where the U.S. dollar is basically the only or favored.
They want to drag the world
Yeah,
back to Bretton
yeah.
Woods.
But right now, particularly for Russia and China, that answer neither works, nor respects the reality of how much the fundamentals have changed, with national trade building apparently happening in the countries in national currency, which are not the U.S. dollar. Now, Mike, I don't know about you, but I would suspect that this trend is going to continue.
Oh, there's no question
Yeah.
about it. The rest of the world is tired of the U.S. bullying.
Yeah.
They're tired of the dollar's hegemonic domination of their own currencies. And basically, the U.S. government and financial system weaponized the dollar
Yeah.
To use it to control other countries. And they're waking up and realizing that and saying, we have to just re-engineer the world
Yeah.
to where the dollar just isn't a factor anymore.
Yeah, and they're doing it. For example, there's a Russian official who has added there were trade talks with India and Russia. And also, Russians are now working with Syrian companies to take part in joint projects to rebuild the war-torn country. And they're going to be signing an agreement that includes 10 extensive focus areas for recovery after the war.
Well, this is really going to anger the United States
Oh,
because
heck yes.
part of the way that money is made off of war is you'll go on in and you'll blow up a country and then you'll go back on in and you say, well, we're going to help you reconstruct. We will loan you
Yeah.
all kinds of money and then you will come to American companies who will come in and rebuild your country.
Right.
Okay, so the United States, after 7 years of war in Syria, lost that prize
Yeah.
because Syria is turning to Russia. You know, Russia's going to loan them the money. Russian companies are going to come on in. They're doing all of their business between the two nations in their own native currencies without
Right.
the dollar. They've
Right.
dropped the dollar. And so I'm sure this has to be angering a lot of the people who really thought war was a really good business, especially the after the war part, you know, where you recapture
Reconstruction.
these
Yeah.
countries in in bank debt and then enrich American corporations by getting the actual contracts. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And we're going to continue to see this. There's absolutely no question about it. Again, you almost have to wonder who's in charge of our foreign policy. Now,
I
obviously,
can tell you who.
Yeah.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
yeah, and see, there's the problem because Benjamin Netanyahu is not running America's foreign policy for the benefit of the United States of America or the American people.
not
He's
at all.
running it for the benefit of Israel. And if along the way the United States goes bankrupt or loses wars, Netanyahu could care less. He'll find some other nation to hop on and parasitize.
Yeah, it is very much, I would characterize it as a host-parasite relationship.
Oh, very much so.
Until the host is dead, and before that time, they'll be jumping onto another host.
I imagine they've already got a list already picked out.
Yeah.
You know, who to go to and suck on their veins after the United States goes dry.
Absolutely. And it is amazing how well you see Syria and Russia working together. The countries have reached 30 agreements on investment projects. And I'm going to bet you, Mike, none of those are going to be in the U.S. dollar.
Okay, there's a story breaking on Fox where they're claiming that U.S. military computers are now under attack by Chinese hackers.
Oh, yeah, right.
And again, real hackers route stuff through.
You won't know where it's come
Yeah,
from.
you
right?
don't really know
Yeah,
where it's coming from. This is more demonization of
Yeah.
China. Be afraid of China.
Yeah.
And remember that article we wrote a while back, the virtual 911, where the U.S. government itself could take down the internet, blame it on a foreign government as a pretext for war.
Yeah, it's accelerating.
It is. It does feel like it's accelerating.
And it looks like it's accelerating against China, Russia, and Iran. You know, and of course, Iran is primary on Netanyahu's to-do list.
Yes.
For the Americans to get rid of the current
So
government.
Iran is also primary on the private central bankers
Yeah,
list because it's the largest of the few remaining countries that don't have a private central bank.
Right. I'd like to hop on over to Iran right now. Apparently, because of geography and relationships with surrounding countries. Iran does, for all intents and purposes, control the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East. And there is, as we probably know, a deployment of a carrier strike group led by USS John C. Stennis in the Persian Gulf. And there was an analyst who said the Iranians aren't going to get that upset about this. But we have had statements from the Iranian government that it would block the Strait of Hormuz if there was any attempt by the U.S. to not allow things to go through it.
Well, basically, they're threatening to block the Strait of Hormuz if the United States increases any more sanctions.
Yeah.
The problem being that there is a central channel in the Strait of Hormuz that is considered international waters.
Right.
And again, nobody has any illusions that the Iranian Navy can stand up to the American Navy. So I wish Rouhani would kind of tone it down a little bit. But
he does get rather, what is the right word for this? Vitriolic, I think.
He does.
Yeah.
I mean, the only way that Iran could block the Strait of Hormuz is to find some really, really big ships and just sink them in that channel.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Rouhani made the statement that Iran would block the Persian Gulf in case the U.S. tried to prevent Iran from selling crude to its customers. And the big customers, of course, are China, India, Japan, and South Korea.
Who are, in fact, continuing to buy Iranian oil. And President Trump was actually forced to sign waivers because these countries really couldn't get their oil from anywhere else. This ties in with that strategic aspect of where the pipelines are and where they're going. And, sending oil by tanker is much more costly.
Yeah. And this analyst, Qadi, mentioned that Iranian lawmakers and military spokespeople keep reiterating that the Islamic Republic is quite capable of defending itself. And the guy says, given the imbalance of power between Iran and the U.S., it's very unlikely that Iran will strike first. It would not be a good thing for Iran to do.
And again, Iran is not a warrior nation. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years, and certainly not since the 1979 Iranian Revolution.
Right. And the question Qadi is asking, with the latest batch of anti-Iranian sanctions imposed by Washington in November, and they thought that it was going to disrupt Iran's oil trade. However, the U.S. introduced waivers for 8 countries. Here we go. The usual suspects: China, India, South Korea, Japan, Italy, Greece, Taiwan, and Turkey. So what happens when the exemptions expire in 6 months and it still has not managed to crimp Iran down in terms of its economy, Mike?
Well, it's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, Japan is already expressing concern about what will happen when the waivers expire. As of right now, they're refusing to sign any more contracts with Iran for past that point.
Yeah.
But Donald Trump, using these waivers, basically shot his own threat down, where he said, we're going to shut Iran's oil output to zero. Obviously, that has not happened.
No, that hasn't. And in terms of the escalation of tension, this analyst also mentioned, come May 2019, unless the impasse is somehow resolved, it may not be just a cause for an escalation between America and Iran only, but also with China and possibly India, albeit unlikely a military one. You know, it's crazy out there.
It really
Absolutely
is.
Crazy.
It really is.
Yeah. And there is a question also asked in Sputnik regarding the Iranian missile program, and wondering if Europe is going to adopt the U.S. narrative on it, that they're being bad and terrible and whatever else. And in the beginning of this month, both Secretary of State Pompeo and German Daily Die Welt raised alarms over Tehran's missile program, with a media outlet claiming that Iran's rockets could reach Europe. I don't know, Mike. But in the original P5+1, those ballistic missiles were never part of the deal, right?
No, they were never part of the deal here, and they're talking about Europe, but it's Israel that has really gone back to Trump and said, get out of the P5+1 and don't do another deal unless Iran gets rid of the missiles that could reach from Iran to Israel.
Yeah.
And again, if Iran gives up their weapons of deterrence, they will be invaded.
Yeah.
Because that has been the pattern that the United States followed, first of all, with Iraq, where they said to Saddam, give up your chemical weapons. He never had nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And we promised, we'll give you security guarantees. And then as soon as Iraq had surrendered their biological weapons under UN control, the U.S. goes on in and invades using 9/11 as an excuse. They did the same thing in Syria. They got Assad to surrender all of his chemical weapons in exchange for security guarantees. And then, Assad is gassing his own people, and went on in and attacked. So same thing with North Korea, same thing with Iran. And Iran knows it. Iran is smart enough. Remember, these are the people who invented the game of chess.
I know.
Okay?
Yeah.
So they understand. They have a legitimate right to defend and deter against foreign invasion.
Yeah.
And the U.S. attitude right now is that no, you're not allowed to be able to fight back against us. The U.S. government is trying to do to all of these nations like Iran what they're doing to the American people.
Yeah.
Strip them of all their arms so they can't defend themselves.
Yeah, I can see that. And the analyst ends with a very interesting question, and that is, the real question is, where will the EU stand vis-a-vis Iran, and whether or not it's going to adopt the American negative, Iran bad, then whether or not it's genuinely believed that Iran poses a military threat. I don't think so, Mike.
No, again, Iran is not an aggressor nation. That's not been their history. But again, this is politics, and the EU may be arm-twisted by the U.S. government to basically say, yeah, we agree this is a bad thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And let's bob on back to Israel for a second. Wonderful article in Zero Hedge. In Sheldon Adelson, far-right Israel hits the jackpot. And they describe President Trump's drive for the presidency a couple of years ago and called him maybe a risky bet. But for billionaire casino magnate Sheldon Adelson, the payoff has been spectacular. The 85-year-old and his wife Miriam gave $82 million to Republicans and candidate Trump in 2016, and within 2 years watched their man execute major addresses. Number one, to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv and withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. And I have to look at this, and I have to say, well, it's got to be great to own a presidency, as apparently Mr. Adelson and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu do. And so here is what is on Tel Aviv's honey-do list for President Trump. Here's what it looks like. 1, attack Iran and bring regime change to the country. 2, attack Lebanon and carve up bits around its Litani River, which is why the Israelis so desperately want to claim this area as its own, because it's wonderful water. 3, destabilize Syria and regime change Damascus. Mr. President, I don't know that you have been listening to us very much. Maybe some people around have been, but I need to offer you a polite word of caution here. Tel Aviv's regime wants all these conflicts to happen, but only at the cost of American blood and American money. Now, Mike, further on this, I would not be surprised if I were a betting woman, which I'm not. I will be very surprised if the draft will not be reinstated, maybe even shortly after the turn of the year, because the U.S. military at this point in its history doesn't have the troop strength, weaponry, manufacturing, or the money to engage successfully in these wars for resources, who controls them, and what currency these resources will be purchased with.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, the reason they're holding off a draft is because they know that will wake the American people up, like it did during Vietnam.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I'm kind of glad right now that the cable TV channels are rerunning Steven Spielberg's movie, The Post, which tells the story of a time when the Washington Post was really about the news.
Yeah.
And they published the Pentagon Papers. Now, for
Yeah.
those who are
Too
young
young.
enough to not know the story,
Yeah.
there was an analyst named Daniel Ellsberg who realized there was this study commissioned by Robert McNamara that concluded that the war was unwinnable
Yeah.
years before it finally ended. And it was a shock to the American people that the U.S. government had continued sending our young people to die in Vietnam just because they didn't want to admit failure.
And if any of you are around my age and you remember when you were in college, the kids you went to school with who left to go to war and never really came back all the way.
All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And what is the next thing you want to talk about, Claire?
Well, color me just slightly optimistic here. There have been Yemen peace talks, and the current round has ended with a ceasefire agreement for Hodeidah, and this is great news. It is being described truce agreement victory for Yemeni nation by one of their chief negotiators, Mr. Abdusalam. And the Houthi movement says a ceasefire has been agreed upon between the warring sides in Yemen, and it's a victory because it will stop Saudi attacks on the strategic city of Hodeidah. Now, this gentleman, full name, is the Houthi chief negotiator, Mohammed Abdusalam. I hope I didn't butcher it. And he made the remarks in an interview with Al Masira TV shortly after the warring parties reached a ceasefire after days of UN brokered talks in Sweden. UN, you got this going. Thank you. Based on the deal, the existing local authorities will be officially in charge of controlling the city and establishing security there under the supervision of the UN. Now, both sides have agreed to withdraw troops from Hodeidah within 21 days. And apparently yesterday when these talks concluded, there was an agreement for more talks. Negotiation is the only way this is ever going to be solved, Mike.
Well, I would like to think so. Now,
Yeah.
another part of this deal is that it has opened up humanitarian aid corridors.
Yes.
So that the UN and other aid agencies can now start getting food in to the people of Yemen, because the situation there is absolutely dire.
Oh, desperate.
Along with they're still dealing with a massive epidemic of what might have been weaponized cholera.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this one was definitely ugly, and I think what's going on here is that everybody looking at this realizes that what the Saudi Arabian government, aided by the U.S. government or working for the U.S. government, is doing is just flat out wrong. It is an atrocity. It's not really a war. It's just flat out conquest and genocide.
Yeah. And it's interesting because this deal appears to be very much like what was proposed by the UN and the Houthis in the first place. The Hadi government had previously rejected this plan and demanded that the Houthis disarm and surrender the city to them. So again, color me slightly optimistic here that peace can be given a chance to take hold, that people who are hurting and sick, and particularly kids, because as those of you know who read Mike's blog, I have no bad feeling about putting the worst of the images up there.
Yes.
And these pictures were taken by some very brave photographers, and bless them. And it breaks my heart, but it's got to go beyond breaking my heart, and it's got to go for a national discussion of why are we in this mess? You know, and there's no other way to call it but to say we're dealing with war crimes here, both Saudi and U.S.
No question.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, yesterday was a little anniversary. 10 years ago yesterday, Al Gore predicted North Pole would be completely ice-free in 5 years.
Way to go, Al.
Yeah. Talk about taking one's credibility and just right down to the ground. And this article referred to and characterized Al Gore in a way I loved. Junk scientist.
Yes. Well, he's had no scientific training.
No.
And he took some mandatory science courses in college, and he got C's.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a climatologist. He's not an environmentalist. He's a politician. Is basically what it is.
Yep. Yeah, and Gore made the prediction to a German audience on December 13th, 2008, and said, the entire North polarized cap will disappear in 5 years. Al,
polarized.
Al, yes.
Polarized cap.
Yes. Right. I don't know where he got that. But so much for Al Gore.
Yes.
As predicting.
And, again, there's an expectation that there will be another major blizzard hitting the United States on Christmas Day.
Oh, boy.
So better get your shopping wrapped up real
and
quickly.
Get it out the door.
Get it out the door.
Yeah.
And if you are planning on traveling to be with family, you might want to think about going a couple of days early.
Yeah.
Or staying a couple of days late.
Yeah.
Assuming they're not going to chase you out of the house with a shotgun for talking politics on Christmas.
Yeah. But it's interesting. And he had so many people who swallowed the whole line, kit and caboodle.
Well, it was part of this plan, for the New World Order. And they were going to convince the people of planet Earth that we needed a single global government. And they had basically three pillars.
Yeah.
The first was human-caused global warming. You're going to have to let some global environmental authority determine how you will live your life. Then there was going to be a global pandemic requiring surrendering your sovereignty to a global health authority. They tried that one in 2009 with the When Pigs Fly flu. That one kind of fizzled.
Yes, I know.
And the third pillar is a global financial meltdown. That one does appear to be on the way.
Yes, definitely.
But most people are smart enough to realize that globalism caused the economic problems, and more globalism will not fix it. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here again. And before we get back to the news, a little friendly reminder that all of the holiday bump music that you're hearing on this show was created by Claire. She made arrangements of some traditional and, in some cases, esoteric Christmas music.
Yes, I did.
For an album called Christmas Without Borders. And you can buy the entire album or individual tracks over at iTunes. And there is a little ad in the middle of whatreallyhappened.com if you want to do that.
Yeah. It was a wonderful project, and I enjoyed doing it. I wanted people to feel the love and exultation of the Christmas spirit. And also a lot of them are written as though people were going to get up and dance.
Yes, yeah, they're very good arrangements of these songs here, and that one that was just playing, "Carol of the Bells," has been the top seller over at iTunes. I think we've sold 6 of them.
Well, I was told that it was my mother's favorite Christmas carol, and that was
it's a
homage
global
to
favorite.
Yeah.
Everybody plays with it. They do versions. Okay, enough with the holiday frippery. We're going to start getting emails from the liberals saying, you can't do Christmas. You're going to offend somebody. Well,
oh, I don't offend anyone. If someone says Merry Christmas, I'll say it back.
Yep.
Happy Hanukkah, that too. Happy Kwanzaa, whatever it is. Just to honor people in a loving and respectful way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, here's something else I wanted our readers and listeners to know about. There have been some very intense, they are described as intensive discussions by Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu with his Indian counterpart in New Delhi. And they are signing agreements up a storm. And Shoigu discussed deepening defense ties and joint manufacturing projects with Nirmala Sitharaman at the 18th India-Russia Intergovernmental Commission on Military Technical Cooperation. Whoa, that's a mouthful. IRIGC-MTC in the Indian capital. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to be doing joint manufacturing projects, including The Kamov 226. Mike, could you explain to our audience what that is?
The Kamov 226 helicopter, I'm not actually familiar with it, except it's military.
Okay.
But they're going to be building, joint building naval frigates and project. Basically, the upshot of this is India is moving away from the United States and into the Russian sphere of influence. And we're seeing this start to happen all over the world. The more bullying and threatening and arrogant the United States government becomes, the more it is alienating our allies and sometimes allies around the world. And definitely the center of power, both military, political, and economic, is shifting away from the United States, and it's moving over to Asia.
Remember that comment I made about nations having a life cycle?
Yes.
Yeah. And if there was ever a time in this country's history that we desperately needed a Department of Peace, it's right the heck now. President Trump, I'm volunteering. Just give me, I'll do it for free. Just give me 2 of the best analysts you possibly have so that we can come up with other, oh, yes, of course, dear.
Yes.
With other ways to achieve the U.S.'s geopolitical and economic objectives other than war, because right now...
Well, see, here's the problem. Because of decades of government mismanagement, the United States has backed itself into a corner. Okay? We've allowed our manufacturing to decline. We don't make products other countries want to buy, certainly not at the elevated prices coming out of the U.S. economy.
Oh, no.
It used to be different. End of World War II. The whole world came to the United States to buy what America was making because we made the best, and it was worth spending the extra money to get that. We've allowed our agriculture to decline. The aqueducts in the western part of this country are only carrying 1/3 of the water they were designed to. So farmers' crops are being reduced, and then there's been that disastrous experiment with GMO, and other countries simply do not want it. And so all the United States has left is to reconquer the world and get them to use the U.S. dollar in exchange for a small fee.
A little piece of the action.
And that's it. And I do not think the United States, as it exists today, is going to last much longer. I'm frankly very amazed. They've made it last this long. I thought it was going to be gone before now. And so... like the Jehovah's Witnesses, I refuse to make any more predictions about the end of the country.
Yes, I hear you.
But to me, it's very obvious it's coming.
Yeah, definitely. And let's go over now to the economic news. Apparently, Johnson & Johnson tumbled after a report said it knew for decades its baby powder contained asbestos. Guys, what were you
we're talking
thinking?
about their stocks. The stocks sank 8% today. Of course, it was a bad day for everybody on the stock market. But the real situation is here. Johnson & Johnson knew that these powders tested positively for traces of asbestos.
You don't put a person around asbestos. It's a bad combination.
That's right. It causes all kinds of mesothelioma, various other illnesses. And Johnson & Johnson apparently just took the attitude of, well, nobody will notice. It's not that big a deal. And we seem to see this behavior through American corporations time and again, whether it's Bayer knowingly selling HIV-tainted hemophilia medications to other countries, vaccine companies putting out vaccines that are may not be effective and in some cases harmful. And by the way, do you remember Lou Ferrigno? He was the original TV version of the Hulk. He's in the hospital now. He had an adverse reaction to the pneumonia vaccine.
Oh, boy. Let's go to Google, which is, that original statement they made, don't be evil. Well, apparently they have been.
Apparently they took that down.
Yes,
they
I know.
took that motto down.
But a little evil is coming out here. The popular author and creator of the Dilbert comic strip, Scott Adams, attacked tech giant Google in a recent Periscope live broadcast for labeling him as a Nazi? What in the world were these people thinking? And what happened? He called out Google in a recent live broadcast after the search engine appeared to return images of Adams photoshopped into Nazi clothing when searching for his name.
Well, you know, if you go to Google and you type in idiot, you still get a picture of Donald Trump.
No, thanks.
Yes.
Oh, and another good thing about our Google, which has decided to be definitely on the evil side.
And remember, when you're listening to this story,
Yeah.
Google themselves are heavily liberal.
Oh, yeah.
But just pay attention to what's coming here.
Now, Google works with establishment conservative think tanks that argue against regulating the tech giant, one of which had its pro-Google opinions published in National Review, according to a new report. Now, audio recordings obtained by Wired reveal that Google cooperates with and funds a range, a smorgasbord of corporations and establishment conservatives in D.C. that help it fend off scrutiny and oversight from politicians. And the organizations named were, drumroll please, the American Enterprise Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, and the Cato Institute. And apparently, they are funded to make sure that there isn't more regulation on Google or, Twitter or Facebook.
Well, I think in this case it's specific to Google.
Yeah.
But I'm one of those people that thinks Google has become way too powerful. There was an article that came through today that said, intentional or not, Google is influencing elections in 25% of the world's countries. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of power no private corporation should have.
I agree.
And again, all Congress would have to do is basically redefine these social media corporations away from being platforms as publishers, and then all kinds of existing law would come into play. But again, for all the money that they've got so far, things are not doing very well. Google has been, and Facebook and Twitter have been caught repeatedly cheating their own advertisers, artificially inflating the number of users, and the new up and coming social media like DuckDuckGo, they're really taking off. Yeah. And I really do encourage all of our listeners, stop using Google, stop using Facebook, stop using Twitter. They are not your friend. They are there to brainwash you. Using your computer into accepting this liberal globalist agenda. And Thomas Jefferson said, the highest duty of any American citizen is to keep themselves fully informed so that they can make good choices. Well, if you're on Google, Facebook, or Twitter, you're not fully informed.
No.
You're being fed a steady diet of liberal propaganda. And we certainly saw that fully on display back in 2016.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it was constant attacks on Trump, constant attacks on Bernie Sanders. All hail her Empress Hillary I. And they weren't very subtle about it at all.
No, they weren't. Also related to computers, apparently the U.S. tech giant Cloudflare provides cybersecurity for at least 7 terror groups, which are listed on the State Department's list of foreign terrorist organizations, including Al-Shabaab, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Al-Quds Brigades, and the Kurdistan Workers' Party, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, and Hamas, as well as the Taliban. And, Michael, why?
Well, I mean, Cloudflare's business is simply to protect your servers from being hacked and attacked. And I don't know that Cloudflare has actually violated any laws. Well, apparently this next part is saying in the United States it's a crime to knowingly provide tangible or intangible material support, including communications equipment, to a designated foreign terrorist organization or provide service to an OFAC-sanctioned entity without special permission. And apparently Cloudflare is not authorized by OFAC to do business with these organizations. Apparently has been informed on multiple occasions going back to 2012 that it is shielding terrorist groups behind its network, and it continues to do so.
And why? The question to me is, why can this not be stopped?
I think the real question is, should it be stopped? Because if you look at, it's very easy for a government to say this is a terrorist group, that's a terrorist group. We don't know that it's really true. Certainly the PLO isn't a terrorist group. They're seeking Palestinian independence. And the people over at Cloudflare may be saying that we're not sure that these groups really are terrorists and that they have as much right to security of their servers as anybody else. This may be the beginning of an attempt to, again, let's disarm the people we have designated as our enemy so that we can attack them.
Yes. Yeah. But I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, we've got to be very careful about that terrorist group label.
Yeah.
Because it gets thrown at our enemies. And, I mean, a good example. I mean, Israel is murdering Palestinians left and right, but Hamas is designated the terror group.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay.
I hear you, dear. Want to go on to Iran?
Before we do that, we have a caller on the line.
All right.
And it's Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good morning, guys, or good afternoon, I should say. Rather.
Good afternoon.
You were talking about Google.
Yes.
Now, granted, we all know who Glenn Beck is. Okay, a lot of people are going to go, "Oh my God, Glenn Beck!" But if you will actually listen to him, there are many times where his broadcasts are quite enlightening.
Yes.
One of the things I like about him is some of the guests that he has on his broadcast. Well, a few weeks ago, he had, I can't remember the fella's name, but this is a guy who's done a lot of research into internet algorithms.
Okay.
And they talk specifically about Google. Since you mentioned Google, it got me thinking about this interview that Glenn Beck had with this fella. He talked about, I forget what he called it, but it was a something suggestive algorithm.
Okay.
And this is where when you type into a search engine, you start typing into the search bar and it'll start throwing out suggestions.
Yes.
And this internet, what they say, there's a couple different things here. What they say is part of the reason for this is they're trying to redirect your thought process by suggesting to you things that you may not have originally started looking for, but they're going to try to redirect your thoughts by suggesting things. It's kind of like a distraction, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
But they went on to talk about how by simply using this suggestive algorithm, they are literally able to take they just used a 50-50 division as an example, 54-50 against. By doing this, using this particular search algorithm, they have literally found that they can create a 10-90 split, and the 90 is in favor of their suggestive algorithm. In other words, you may start out thinking ABC, but by the time their algorithm gets done with you, you're thinking XYZ.
Well, I got a lot of emails from people who were complaining back during 2016, during the campaign, and they would go to Google and they would want to search for the articles on the crimes of the Clintons, and they would start typing Hillary, and immediately the suggestive algorithm would have Hillary's campaign headquarters, and Hillary's done this that's great, and Hillary's done that that's great, trying to basically lure people away from following their own line of inquiry.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they do. And they say that this is such an effective tool come election time that they actually count on Google's algorithms to help direct the voter mind. Now, that's pretty scary.
Yeah.
That is very scary.
You're right. Absolutely.
So this is what people need to keep in mind. And it doesn't matter if you're using Gmail, if you're using Google Chrome, even if you're using Firefox, you're still tied in with Google and Microsoft.
Wow.
Is, however, a really nice browser I found. It's called Waterfox.
Okay.
All right, we'll have to take a look at it, but right now we have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. America, welcome back to our show. Last segment of this Pauhana Friday, and Claire, Next story, please.
Yes, and I want to let our readers and listeners know where this is from. This is from Press TV, which is an English language outlet for Iranian news. Now, what Zarif is saying is that Trump's anti-Iran policy is proving that the U.S. influence is absolutely in decline. And he sort of said this tongue-in-cheek with a little bit of a Cheshire cat grin on his face. He made the statement today that Iran has the lowest defense spending in the Middle East, but is still the strongest country in the region, maybe second to Israel, while the U.S., with the highest military budget in the world, is unable to stop Iran's growth, which shows that the U.S.'s power and influence is waning. And, it's very strange. And what I think
No, it's not strange at all. We're seeing,
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. Looks very impressive right now with all of its weaponry, but it's overextended.
Yeah.
We have something like 700 military bases around the world that are a hideous drain on our economy. We've been at war in multiple countries going back 17 years now.
Yep.
Longer than we were in World War I and World War II put together.
Yeah.
Stockpiles are drawn down. Equipment is worn out. People are tired. Nobody believes these wars are right, moral, or justified. When you look at these stories about how India is moving closer to Russia and Russia and Syria are doing business together in their own currencies, you can see that the U.S. influence over the rest of the world is definitely declining.
Yeah.
And the U.S. government did it to themselves, and trying to blow up the world really isn't going to absolve them of that guilt.
No, definitely won't. But it seems as though there is a mindset in D.C. that the only way to do something is through military violence, military action, when there are really a whole lot of other possible ways you could be approaching an issue.
Well, unfortunately, the U.S. government's attitude right now seems to be shoot first and ask questions later.
Yeah.
Or actually, it's tell a lie, then shoot, then ask questions later.
Right. There was another article that kind of tailed into this, and I believe it was from Tyler Durden. That would be Zero Hedge. The America Last Express hurtles on, Saudi Arabia, INF, and Ukraine. And they're talking about how candidate Trump's promised America first has seemed to crumble into little tiny bits and pieces. And
he had nothing to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And any realistic notion of American national interest comes last after the priorities of, well, pretty much everyone else with a leverage in Washington.
Israel, big pharma, big oil, big guns.
Yeah, and then he says something that's a killer line. Vladimir Putin's high five to crown pariah MBS at the G20 amid the fall outrage. Come on, does anyone think really that MBS was the only killer in that room?
Absolutely not. And there's the music, unfortunately.
All right.
We have run out of time.
Yes.
Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know, put it on hard copy, have a face-to-face conversation, bring back the art of the conversation.
Yes.
Okay. For one thing, you won't wreck your neck constantly leaning over your electronic device here. So please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com, and have a really good and safe weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.